We're going to try this now. Looks like the microphone's working good. So go ahead and turn in your Bibles over to Mark chapter 14. We're going to just review A and B of our outlines here just briefly. Lesson 14. We're going to look at lesson 14C specifically. We're going to look at A and B just kind of in brief, reviewing some things. But in lesson 14A, looking at those first 11 verses, we saw a lot of different things take place right at the very beginning of chapter 14. We see that the chief priests and all those folks who wanted Christ dead are plotting together, and they're trying to figure out, okay, how do we do this? And they're wanting to do it in secret. You see, they wanted to do it behind everyone's back. How do we try him? How do we put him to death? And things like that. How do we get this? Again, the phrase in the King James Version is that how they might take him by craft. Craft, that implies deceit, craftiness. You see, we sometimes use that word. Verse 2, of course, of chapter 14, but they said not on the feast day, again, lest there be an uproar of the people. They wanted to do this in secret. They wanted to do it deceitfully. And we're actually going to see here in lesson 14, chapter 14 of Mark, that they actually will get in. Jesus is going to point it out to them. You're doing this in secret. He's going to say that to them in the garden. But a lot of different things happened. Here in the first 11 verses of chapter 14, we see that Mary made that sacrifice, though she isn't mentioned as being Mary in Mark. She is in the gospel account of John. When you look at chapter 18, verses 1 through 11 of John. But she makes the sacrifice in chapter 14. And in chapter 14, it says there were those there who were basically indignant. I think that's the word it uses. He says that they were kind of grumbling against her over this. You went and this precious ointment could have been used, could have been sold, and the money gone to the poor, you see. And actually, if you read John's accounts, that was actually Judas who had been doing that, who was saying it. And maybe there was others, but Judas is one who was one among them. And he said just those exact words. He said, this money could have been sold. This precious ointment could have been sold. It was expensive. It could have been sold and the money given to the poor. And, well, Jesus had a rebuke for him after that. He said, look, she is doing something good. She is making this good sacrifice. You see, she had been doing something that was a good work and something that was a sacrifice for Christ. And it's interesting because right after that, it says that Judas went and agreed with the chief priests, made an agreement with them to betray Jesus. And John's account even says that Judas would take money out of the collection, if you will. In John's account, it says that he would take money out of their special collection between the disciples and Christ, what they would have, and he would just take money out of it, steal. And so he might be thinking, can't get my money from the precious ointment. Maybe I can get money from betraying Jesus. That could be something that's going on here. Though that's not really we don't know that for certain. It does seem odd that, it goes from being angry over not getting the money from the precious ointment to betraying Jesus for silver. It just seems kind of interesting that happens almost back to back right here. But we also went into lesson 14b. We looked at verses 12 through 42, and we saw a lot of things there. My apologies. Let me get this just real quickly taken care of. There we go. That's supposed to be turned off. I think it automatically turned back on, but never know anymore. But we saw in verses 12 through 50 several different things take place. First of all, of course, Jesus partakes of the Passover. We saw that in verses 12 through 21. And then, of course, in verses 22 through 25, we read about him instituting the Lord's Supper. Just a few reminders of this. Let's read verses 22 through 25. It says, and as they did eat, Jesus took bread, and blessed and brake it, and gave to them, and said, Take, eat, this is my body. And he took the cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, and they all drank of it. And he said unto them, This is my blood of the New Testament, which is shed for many. Verily I say unto you, I will drink no more of the fruit of the vine until the day that I drink it new in the kingdom of God. And right there, we're seeing some things here in this particular outline of lesson 14b. Of course, we see him specifying the emblems. Verse 22, this would have been the unleavened bread that was present there during the Passover. And then, of course, the fruit of the vine. It's interesting. A lot of people make an issue over this thing about it being the cup. We talked about that a little bit last week with the cup, and how people say, well, that means there needs to be only one cup. Well, I could point you to at least one, we call them, some people call them one cuppers. I think it's better to just call them one container, because they think it just needs to come out of one container and everybody drink from that same container. But in any situation, here's the thing. There's some of those that get so large, they start using 2 cups. It's like, well, doesn't that destroy the entire purpose of wanting to have just 1 cup? It just doesn't make any sense how people do that when they want to go by that particular standard. But here's what it says. Again, it says he took of the cup. Now, some people would make that argument on some things. For example, of course, this is talking about the contents of the cup. Notice with me Luke. Turn over to the Gospel according to Luke. I had the verse written down, but it took a hike on me, if you will. But in Luke's account, I want you to see this with me. In Luke chapter 22, here it is. Luke chapter 22. I apologize for, like I said, I had it written down, but it's traveling on me. Stuff is traveling on me tonight. But in verse 17, it says, And when he had taken a cup and given thanks, he said, Take this. And does someone have a King James version? Why don't you see what the King James says?
Then he took the cup and gave thanks and said, Take this and divide it among yourselves.
See that? Divide it. He'd had them divide it. It doesn't say they took a sip out of the cup and all of that. He said, divide it amongst yourselves. Verse 18, For I say to you, I will not drink of the fruit of the vine from now on until the kingdom of God comes. Of course, you read passages like Colossians 1:13, that's a reference to the church. You keep reading on, verse 19. And when he had taken some bread and given thanks, he broke it and gave it to them, saying, This is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. And in the same way he took the cup. Notice this. After they had eaten, saying, This cup which is poured out for you is the new covenant in my blood. So he said, Here's the cup. Is it the cup or the contents of the cup? He said, Take the cup and divide it amongst yourselves.
Oh, it's in the contents.
It's the contents. And let's pretend this is a cup. He said, divide amongst yourselves. Well, we'll just take a little piece off here of the cup, and here's some cup for you, and here's a piece of the cup for you, and you can't do that. It's not the cup he's talking about. It's the contents, the grape juice, the fruit of the vine. Here's another thing that someone had brought this up, not last time, but a few years ago, someone brought this up in a Bible study I was at, and they said, well, can't we use tomatoes? Because tomatoes are a quote-unquote fruit of the vine. Well, here's the thing. Whenever they used fruit of the vine back then, in this particular time, it never meant tomato juice. You told someone, we're going to have fruit of the vine, and then you offer them tomato juice, they'd look at you like you're crazy. That's not how that worked. Fruit of the vine was always a reference in that time towards grape juice.
Well, they didn't know they had tomato plants then.
Yeah, there may not have been. I'd have to look, see if there were tomato plants in that part of Israel or not, or if they struggled with that. But yeah, it's a reference to grape juice here. And then, of course, we see in your outlines, number 3 there on page 3, it says day. That's an important thing there to realize. Day here indicated that there would be a specific day, that day when I take it new with you in my Father's kingdom. Not days. No, he doesn't say in those days, as if there's going to be, you can take it the first day, second day, third day, fourth day. of the week, he says, that day when I take it new with you in my Father's kingdom. Again, indicated that there would be a specific day that they would take the Lord's Supper when the kingdom, again, the kingdom being the church, Revelation 1 verse 6, would be built. We see that day specified in Acts 20 verse 7, on the first day of the week, when they gathered together to break bread. Any questions or comments on that? As you keep moving on here, we, of course, I think we read through the verses 26 through 42, but we didn't get into the outline part. But we see some things happen here as they are basically leaving, having taken the Lord's Supper, and are leaving for the Mount of Olives. It says in verse 26, when they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. And Jesus saith unto them, all ye shall be offended because of me this night. For it is written, I will smite the shepherd, and the sheep shall be scattered. But after that I am risen, I will go before you into Galilee. But Peter said unto him, although all shall be offended, yet will not I. And Jesus saith unto him, verily I say unto thee, that this day, even in this night, before the cock crow twice. Some translations say rooster. That's what that is. Before the cock crow twice. That's important there too. Most of the gospel accounts, most of the time we hear about it, it's always before it crows, before the rooster crows. Well, no, it's twice. It's going to crow once, and then it's going to crow a second time. And Mark actually records both of those. But as we keep going on, it says there again in verse 30, and Jesus saith unto him, verily I say unto thee, that this day, even in this night, before the cock crow twice, thou shalt deny me thrice. But he spake the more vehemently, if I should die with thee, I will not deny thee in any wise. Likewise, also said they all. They're all saying, no, we're not going to abandon you, Jesus. We're not going to forsake you. Well, notice, we're going to see that actually they will in lesson 14c. But as we keep reading on, verse 32 says, and they came to a place which was named Gethsemane. And he saith to his disciples, sit ye here while I shall pray. And he taketh with him Peter and James and John, and began to be sore amazed, and to be very heavy. And he saith unto them, my soul is exceedingly sorrowful unto death. Tarry ye here and watch. Well, notice what happens next. He says, watch. I'm sorrowful. I need to go take care of something. You guys stay here and watch. Notice what happens in verse 35 through the rest of the through verse 42. And he went forward a little and fell on the ground and prayed that if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. And he said, Abba, Father, all things are possible unto thee. Take away this cup from me. Nevertheless, not what I will, but what thou wilt. And he cometh and findeth them sleeping, and saith unto Peter, Simon, sleepest thou? Couldst not thou watch 1 hour? Watch ye and pray, lest ye enter into temptation. The spirit truly is ready, but the flesh is weak. Some translations say the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Verse 39, and he again he went away and prayed and spake the same words. And when he returned, he found them asleep again, for their eyes were heavy, neither wist they what to answer him. And he cometh the third time, and saith unto them, sleep on now, and take your rest, it is enough. The hour is come. Behold, the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise up, let us go. Lo, he that betrayeth me is at hand. So we're seeing some stuff happening here. Of course, Jesus is here at Gethsemane. Before they went, they sang a hymn. Jesus prophesied that his followers were just going to desert him. This was a prophecy that's found in the book of Zechariah, chapter 13, verse 7. They would just desert him. But he says, look, when I rise from the dead, I'll meet you all in Galilee. That's what he says there. Jesus prophesied, let her see there, Jesus prophesies that Peter would deny him 3 times. Peter promised that he would remain faithful. He wasn't going to deny him. He was going to be willing to die for him. Well, we're going to see as we read through the rest of chapter 14 that was not the case. says the other disciples promised that they would remain faithful. That was not the case. We'll see that here in a minute. And, that it was not the case. Letter D, Jesus prayed 3 times. Now, here's a question. We see that he prays to the Father 3 times. He says, let this cup pass from me. Is this Jesus saying, I don't want to die for the sins of the world? What is Jesus saying here? He was willing to die, yeah. He was willing to die. He was saying, if someone else can do it, let them do it. But if this is the will of my Father for me to die for the sins of the world, I'll do it. It wasn't him saying, don't make me go through this. I could tell you of one preacher who said that. He said that Jesus was praying, don't make me go through this death. Don't make me do this. Well, that wasn't the case at all. He was simply praying that he was simply praying for, again, if someone else can handle this, let them do it. But if not, he was willing to die the horrible death that was required. We also see, of course, here's another thing. Some people read this and they see where Jesus said, Abba, Father. Some people want to say that means that he's saying Daddy. Well, if we were to call God Daddy, that just doesn't sound very respectful today. What it is it's a particular Aramaic word that basically just means, it's this idea of a small child pleading to his father, Abba. It wouldn't really mean daddy. It would mean it's an appeal from a young child to a father, you see, is what it is. Maybe dad, maybe, but more likely it's father, but from a perspective of a young child. Talking to him, begging. Of course, when we look here, when Jesus prayed 3 times in the outline letter D, Peter, James, and John couldn't even stay awake. Think about that. They couldn't even stay awake. You see verse 41. This happened 3 times. And he cometh the 3rd time and saith unto them, sleep on now, and take your rest. Maybe he's being sarcastic here. Just go ahead and sleep, whatever. I asked you to watch and you couldn't even watch. Jesus was sorrowful that he must die. And yet those who were there with him couldn't even stay up and watch and do what he asked of them. That's pretty sad. It's interesting. He says, let this cup pass from you. This cup is the cup of suffering that he must drink. Of course, we read in Mark 10:38-39, when James and John were like, well, we're willing we want to be that what was it? Sit on your left and right hand. Well, Jesus said, among a couple other things, he said, can you drink of the same cup that I drink of? That, of course, was a cup or a reference to suffering. It wasn't the cup. Again, the cup wasn't an actual cup. It was a reference to suffering. You see, the contents of the cup, if you will. Any questions or comments on that? Moving on to number 14C, lesson 14C. We see a few different things occur then in these last few verses. I've got a few extra notes here because there's a lot of things that happened that a lot of people don't think about. Looking here at verses 43 through 72, we're going to see Judas betray Jesus. We see that Jesus is going to be before the high priest, and then, of course, Peter is going to deny Jesus. We're seeing all of his disciples flee too. There in verse 43 it says, and immediately, while he yet spake, cometh Judas, one of the 12, and with him a great multitude with swords and staves from the chief priests and the scribes and the elders. And he that betrayed him, again Judas here, had given them a token, saying, whomsoever I shall kiss, that same is he, take him and lead him away safely. It's interesting he uses that word safely right there, almost like he doesn't know that they want Jesus dead. That's kind of odd there that he would say, lead him away safely. But anyways, verse 45 says, And as soon as he was cometh, he goeth straightway to him, and saith, Master, Master, and kissed him. And they laid their hands on him, and took him. And one of them that stood by drew a sword. Of course, we know that that was Peter, based on other accounts. And one of them that stood by drew a sword, and smote a servant of the high priest, and cut off his ear. And Jesus answered, and said unto them, Are ye come out as against a thief, with swords and with staves to take me? I was daily with you in the temple teaching, and ye took me not, but the scriptures must be fulfilled. And they all, notice that there, all forsook him and fled. See that right there? They had all been saying, no, we're not going to deny you. No, we're not going to, we're not going to deny you. We're not going to abandon you. We won't forsake you. We won't abandon you like you're saying that we will. And here they are, all abandoning him now. They forsook him and fled. And there followed him a certain young man, having a linen cloth cast about his naked body. And the young men laid hold on him. And he left the linen cloth and fled from them naked. And so that's that section right there. We're seeing Judas betray Jesus. He betrayed him with a kiss. The reasons for this, I mean, a kiss was a greeting. It was a form of greeting that friends would share back during this particular time. This wasn't, that would be kind of weird today, but it would be, like shaking hands back then. It'd be like coming up and saying, the person who I shake hands with, you need to grab and take him away safely. That's what Judas had done, basically, but with a kiss, with a greeting. It's a form of betrayal. I mean, a handshake is a friendly greeting. Betraying someone with a friendly handshake, you see. That's about the equivalent of what it was back then, betraying someone with a kiss, with a greeting that's supposed to indicate friendship back then. And again, the reason why he would have agreed to this, it's like, well, wait a minute here. Don't they recognize him from in the temple? Don't these people recognize Jesus? I mean, he was just in the temple preaching. He was in the temple, tossing over tables and stuff. Isn't he, wouldn't they be able to recognize him? Well, maybe not. It may have been pretty dark for him. And so, that's one of the reasons the other folks may not have recognized Jesus in the dark. It's interesting. A lot of people portray Jesus as having a white cloak on all the time. And what are his disciples wearing? Brown, maybe black, maybe gray clothing. Wait a minute. If Jesus is wearing white clothing all the time, everybody should be able to pick him out in the crowd, you see. Because, oh, wait, pure white robes, and 11 people are gathered around him are wearing brown, black, gray. Well, likely he's wearing robes just like the rest of them. And so they would have likely not recognized him in the dark because of that.
Well, because that you see, all the men look alike.
Yeah, that too.
They're turbans,
Yeah.
long hair, or whatever.
Yeah. They may have had, but exactly. And it would have been harder to see people in the dark. It was like, is that him? I can't tell. Is his beard the right color? Is it brown? Is it black? Things like that. Of course, at the same time, these may not have been the same people who conversed with Jesus prior. Maybe they weren't there and saw Jesus turn over the tables and preach about authority. Maybe they weren't among those who questioned him. You see, maybe a little bit of both. Maybe there's only a few that had seen him. Maybe a good hunk of them haven't. Either way, this was to get focus directed on Jesus at this point, to get him arrested. Any questions or comments on that? Of course, we see Jesus seized after this, verses 46 and 47. A disciple cut off the ear of the servant of the high priest. His name, of course, the one who did this was Peter, active as ever. And then, of course, the name of the servant is referenced as Malchus, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, Malchus. Luke 22, 50 through 51 records Jesus healing the servants. Jesus went over and healed him. And that's going to be interesting because I want you to see what happens later on when Jesus is before the high priests. But you notice verses 48 and 49 there, we reference that they had been trying to find some way of arresting Jesus in secret, how they might get rid of him in secret. Jesus is getting after them for that. He said, you did this in secret, even though I was in the temple. I was in the temple every day, and you didn't seek to arrest me then. He's pointing out that they're being kind of crafty about this, deceitful. Uh, I was in the temple, and you're just going to come and do this in secret. I was right there in front of every one of you. And so, once again, maybe they didn't recognize him. Maybe some of those people weren't there, but there were others, because Jesus does say, they saw him. So again, maybe it was just too dark out, or maybe it's because only some of the people may have recognized him and some of the people wouldn't. But anyways, they seized him. Letter C there under the discussion, Jesus pointed out the cowardly way they arrested him. They were arresting him like a common thief, basically, doing it in secret, doing it behind. They were just behaving like thieves, doing it in secret here. They arrested him in secret when they could have done it in the temple, but they were afraid of the people. They were kind of cowardly, basically. And then, of course, we see in verse 50 that the disciples ended up forsaking him. And we don't really know much about this naked man who followed. I mean, there's a whole bunch of various traditions out there saying maybe it was an apostle, maybe, with it being a linen sheet of some sort, maybe this was someone who had just gotten out of bed and coming to see what's going on here. And then he ended up fleeing. Maybe this was a disciple who just got out of bed but wasn't with Jesus at the Passover. There's all kinds of speculations out there. Regardless, here's a man who was following, and he ended up forsaking, or at least not forsaking, but fleeing away. Any questions or comments on that? Yes.
Well, I think he uses verse 49, where Jesus tells them that the scripture must be fulfilled.
Yes.
In Luke's account, Jesus talks about that scripture that's fulfilled, that he would be numbered with the transgressors. There's a reason he tells them to go and get swords.
Yeah.
It was never to fight. There's only 2 swords, right? And 2 swords are never enough to take on the Roman soldiers. That's what that. It was to fulfill a prophecy so that he'd be numbered among the transgressors. If he was caught with a sword, him or his disciples, by the Romans, that was considered insurrection. Right? And so that's all it took. Yep. That's why when Peter draws the sword to cut off the servant's ear, he says, enough.
Yeah.
What? And so he's trying to fulfill those scriptures that talks about him being numbered with the transgressors.
Yeah.
And you're right about this young man here. There's a lot of speculation about it's one of those weird stories we find in Mark's account here, but some early first century writers seem to think it is Mark.
Yeah.
They're talking about here. And that from some accounts, the idea is that the upper room was probably in the home of Mark's mother. And maybe these soldiers come looking for Jesus there, and he's not there.
Yeah.
But they wake someone up.
Yeah.
It could have been Mark, and he flees the scene, possibly to go warn Jesus that they're coming looking for you. And so we don't know. It's all speculation.
Yeah. Yeah. Lot of speculation. Either way, if this was a disciple, he too fled, basically. Yeah. If he was a disciple, he fled along with everyone else. But a lot of good points there. You keep moving on. You see in verses 53 through 65, he's going to be before that high priest. And it says specifically, reading through those verses, and they led Jesus away to the high priest. And with him were assembled all the chief priests and the elders and the scribes. And Peter followed him afar off. You see, Peter's staying there, kind of. I mean, I don't know if you could consider this having not forsaken him yet or what, but he's following him. Afar off, it says, even into the palace of the high priest. And he sat with the servants and warmed himself at the fire. And the chief priests and all the council sought for witness against Jesus to put him to death, and found none. for many bear false witness against him, but their witness agreed not together. In other words, they were contradicting each other. That's what that means. Agreed not together. And there arose certain and bear false witness against him. So there was a certain group that came bearing false witness, lying basically again. That's what that means, is lying. And in verse 58, here's what they said. We heard him say, I will destroy this temple that is made with hands, and within 3 days I will build another made without hands. But neither so did their witness agree together. See, so they're lying, and even though they're lying, their testimony doesn't agree. They're bearing false witness. They're breaking one of the 10 commandments, which was still in effect at this time. You shall not bear false witness. And then, of course, it says that they were lying, and even their testimony didn't agree with each other. Think about that. That even they were still contradicting each other, even though they came up with this one. Verse 60 says, and the high priest stood up in the midst and asked Jesus, saying, answerest thou nothing? What is it which these witnesses against thee? In other words, these guys are saying things about you. Aren't you going to say anything? Got anything to say for yourself, Jesus? Well, look what happens. Verse 61, but he held his peace and answered nothing. Again, the high priest asked him and said unto him, art thou the Christ, the Son of the Blessed? And Jesus said, I am, and ye shall see the Son of Man sitting on the right hand of power and coming in the clouds of heaven. Then the high priest rent his clothes, in other words, he tore them, and said, what need we any further witnesses? We have heard the blasphemy. What think ye? In other words, we don't even need the witnesses. They're bearing false witnesses. This is blasphemy. That's what he's claiming right there, even though it wasn't. He says, what think ye? And they all condemned him to be guilty of death. And some began to spit on him, and to cover his face, and to buffet him, and to say unto him, prophesy. And the servants did strike him with the palms of their hands. See that right there? I want you to see all of this coming together. Of course, Jesus is led away as Peter followed. Those gathered together against Christ had false witnesses who contradicted each other. Someone read for us Numbers 32, verse 23. I want you to see this verse with me. It's an interesting verse here. I think it connects a lot with this section here, or at least with the fact that there's all these false witnesses and they're contradicting each other.
Numbers what?
Numbers chapter 32, verse 23.
But if you will not do so, because you have sinned against the Lord, and be sure your sin will find you out.
It's an interesting phrase there. Be sure your sin will find you out. Why do I bring up that verse? Why would that verse kind of connect? How would that verse connect with what's going on here?
Well, I'm guilty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. False witness, and it's being proven that these are false witnesses. Their sin is finding them out through how? The contradiction that's taking place. Sin can find itself out in many different ways. It can find itself out on a man's face. It can find itself out on in a person's health. You know, if they sin, for example, in in the one of the various sexual sins that are out there, sexual immorality. You know, they may get one of these STDs. You know, that's one way sin can find someone out. There's a lot of ways that can happen. But right here, with the false witness, it's being found out that they're lying, that they're bearing false witness by the fact that they're contradicting each other, you see. And even though they're contradicting each other and they can't find, they've got nothing to go on with these false witnesses. Even with this claim that that they're saying Jesus is going to destroy the temple and rebuild a spiritual one in 3 days. That's contradictory. They're contradicting each other on that. Look at John 2:19 through 22. That's not even true. I mean, what Jesus had said there, he didn't say destroy the physical temple and I'll rebuild a spiritual one in 3 days. Someone read for us John chapter 2, verses 19 through 22.
Jesus answered them, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I'll raise it up. The Jews then said, it took 46 years to build this temple, and you will raise it up in 3 days. But he was speaking of the temple of his body.
So what? Sorry, go ahead. Yeah. Yep. And so we're seeing right there. It was actually, go ahead and read the next verse.
So when he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered that he said this, and they believed the scripture and the word which Jesus had spoken.
And so that's a reference to his resurrection, of him being killed 3 days later, resurrection, the temple of his body. We often see that the body is referred to as a temple, sometimes a tabernacle. Some translations, instead of tabernacle, say tent there in 2 Corinthians chapter 5. But he uses the temple to describe his body. His body he's referring to as a temple, if you will, because it houses a spirit, you see. His spirit, the Son of God, in that regard. What Jesus had said was concerning his body, not the temple there in Jerusalem when he had said that. And by the way, think about this. This had been years ago when Jesus had said that. In John chapter 2, this is like when the beginning of Jesus preaching at that point in John 2. And so people are complaining about, saying stuff about this 5 years after the fact or so. I'm trying to remember how long he was preaching, but it was about 5 years, maybe give or take a few years, but it was a certain amount of time. And then what happened? Here's these people complaining about something he said, and they can't even get that straight. You see. And he didn't, or trying to false witness on this. They're saying, well, this is what he said. That's not what he said. He said his body was a temple. He was referring to that. He said, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will rebuild it. Again, they're lying, false witnesses. Well, here's what happens. The high priest, because he's not getting anywhere with these false witnesses, he questions Jesus. Jesus said nothing in his own defense to that. Because, just think about it. He didn't have to defend himself at all. All these people proved themselves liars, people bearing false witness in all of this. Jesus had done nothing wrong. This was a corrupt trial that was taking place. It's interesting. You read 61b and 62a, those two halves of those two verses. When asked if he was the Son of the Blessed, he replied that he was. And then, of course, Jesus told the high priest that he would see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven, sitting on his throne, using that kind of verbiage, likely quoting kind of a mixture of Psalm 110, verse 1, and, Daniel 7, verse 13. Now, here's something that needs to be understood. Historians state that Caiaphas, who's this high priest here, by the way, they didn't establish him according to the Mosaic law. He was put in office by a governor of the Roman Empire, you see. This was not someone who inherited this by the Levitical priesthood way of doing it according to the law of Moses. This was the Roman Empire saying, you're high priest now, Caiaphas, you see. And it was his uncle, or no, not his uncle, his father-in-law who had been high priest before him. And so you got all these issues going on right here. But it says right here in our outlines, historians state that Caiaphas died in 46 AD. Hence, this was not referring to him specifically seeing the destruction of Jerusalem. Someone might think, oh, that's verbiage describing that destruction of Jerusalem that took place from 66 to 70 AD. Well, that's not the case. There are some possibilities, though. It's possible that when Jesus said, you will see, it's important to understand the word you is not in the Greek at all, which is interesting. I thought that was kind of odd, but the word you isn't in the Greek. And so it just says, we'll see. WILL, we'll see. the Son of Man coming in the clouds, sitting on his throne. And so he could be talking to all of them, everyone in that room. It's possible that when he said that he was talking to the people, all the people in the room, it's possible that Ananias, who would come up later, become high priest, though he's not mentioned here, was there in the room as just one of the other priests. He would later judge Paul in Acts 23, verse 3, and he would be killed in 66 AD at the hands of the Zealots after the first attack on Jerusalem that took place. And so this could be a reference to, everyone in that room, saying that there's going to be people in this room that see this. You're all going to see this. Some of you are going to see this. This could have been a reference to him or some of the priests there seeing Christ's authority from the church. You see, the church is the kingdom. Revelation 1 verse 6, Colossians 1 verse 13. Christ sits on his throne as king. We see that in Ephesians 1 at the very end of those verses. It talks about Christ sitting at the right hand of God, and he's above all power and rule and dominion and authority. And some Christians would have various spiritual gifts. Now, that could be a reference to Christ doing that, showing that Christ had authority. We read about some of those spiritual gifts in 1 Corinthians 12 through 14. Some of those priests, I want you to notice this now. Someone read for us Acts 6, verse 7. I want you to read what happened with some priests. Now, I don't know if these were among the priests that crucified, that were calling for Jesus to be crucified there, right here in this room at this time. Maybe. But it does say something about the priests, about some priests in Acts 6, verse 7.
And the word of God increased, and the number of disciples multiplied in Jerusalem greatly, and a great company of priests were obedient in the faith.
See that right there? A great number of the priests were obedient to the faith. Some of the priests obeyed the gospel. Maybe some of those priests received spiritual gifts, and so they would have seen some of that authority of Christ being displayed through those spiritual gifts, being proved through that. Again, Mark 16 says that the word would be proved through the signs that followed. That could be it. A lot of people tend to hold to this last one, though, and this may be more likely the case. Here on letter E at the top of page 5, others think that this may just be a reference to Caiaphas being judged on Judgment Day. It could just be a reference to the judgment. You're sitting on a throne of judgment right now, and you're going to see the Son of Man judge you. You're going to see judgment come on you from the person that you're trying to kill. That could be a reference, kind of a way of saying that, saying it that way. Any questions or comments on that? Hope all of that makes sense. Like I said, these are three different opinions that kind of circulate out there. There's a lot of, sometimes some confusion on that. Like I said, a lot of people tend to hold to that third one on the list. Those gathered together, we see, abuse Jesus after this. Once you see that in verses 63 through 65, he was accused of blasphemy. He was condemned to be guilty of death. This is interesting. It was an unfair trial in many ways, including based on their own man-made traditions. There was an interesting tradition they had. A unanimous decision, letter B there underneath point number 2, letter E. Letter E, number 2, letter B. A unanimous decision to have one executed would have resulted in an acquittal and release for anyone else. Now, someone might say, well, what? If people unanimously agree to have someone put to death, that means he goes away free? What would that be? Well, it's an interesting tradition that took place there in this point in time, during this time of Christ, that with this really, really weird man-made tradition. But this was because a unanimous decision to execute, with no one offering anything good to say about the defendant, if you will, might imply that something was wrong with the court. Bribery, blackmail. Could have been other things. Could have been just, the court was so dead set against him. Maybe he was accused of murdering one of their relatives. Maybe he was accused of something else, you see. But the tradition was a unanimous decision to put someone to death meant they go away free. Just to make sure there wasn't a corrupt trial taking place. Something wrong with the court. Well, there's a unanimous decision right here to kill Jesus, to have Jesus put to death. They didn't release him. They didn't even follow their own man-made tradition. They wanted him dead so bad that they were willing to get rid of their own tradition to have him killed. Jesus was spat on. We see there, verse 65 at the first part. He was mocked and beaten there in 65. First, blindfolded here. I want you to see this here. Then buffeted, the King James Version says. The Greek word means to strike with the fist. Give one a blow with the fist. In other words, they're punching him. They punched Jesus. And then they told him to prophesy. In other words, here's what you have right here. They blindfold him, punch him. Who punched you? You're a prophet. Prophesy who punched you. They're mocking him here. That's what they're doing. Think about this too. This is one person being beaten up by the crowd. This is maybe not necessarily the crowd, but it's almost like gang violence right here taking place. They're all just a whole bunch of people gathering around and having at Jesus, basically. Just smacking him, punching him. Verse 65, I want you to see this in verse 65 again. Notice what it says. And some began to spit on him, and to cover his face, and to buffet him, punch him, and to say unto him, prophesy. And the servants did strike him with the palms of their hands. Now I ask, why is that so important? What did we just read about what happened in the Garden of Gethsemane to a man named Malchus? He had his ear chopped off, but Jesus healed it. And yet here, probably Malchus among them, is likewise going and smacking Jesus. The man who healed his ear. And he's joining in this, once again, basically gang violence taking place. A group of people beating up on one. That's what we're seeing there. That's horrible. But just remember, that's what Jesus went through for every one of us. That's we're going to read more about that in the rest of chapter 15. Lord willing, we'll conclude chapter 14 and get into chapter 15 next week. Are there any questions or comments before we conclude on that? Again, a lot of stuff going on in chapter 14. 72 verses. A very long chapter, next to especially Matthew. I think the only chapter, if you can call it that you find in the Bible that's longer than those two verses, it's either in Jeremiah or it's actually going to be in Psalm 119. So just something there to think about. Were there any questions or comments before we close tonight? Well, thank everyone for being here this evening.